The howling wind carried the cries of a hungry child across the barren plains of Montana Territory. 1885. As Delilah Faulkner clutched her newborn to her chest and prayed for the strength to keep her remaining 8 children alive through another freezing night on the unforgiving road to nowhere. The death of Delilah's husband 3 weeks prior had left her with nothing but a weathered wagon, 2 sickly horses, and 9 hungry mouths to feed. Their farm in Kansas had been seized by the bank. Every penny they owned had gone to Dr. Bill's, and now they traveled west on nothing but desperation and dwindling hope. The youngest, little Emma, had been born just days before her father drew his final breath, never even seeing her daughter's face. "Mama, I'm cold," 7-year-old Joseph whimpered, his small frame shivering despite being sandwiched between his older siblings beneath their only remaining blanket. "I know, darling," Delilah whispered, trying to keep her voice steady, "but we'll be warm soon, I promise." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Their wagon wheel had broken beyond repair that afternoon, the axle splintering when they hit a deep rut in the road. With darkness falling and no town for miles, she had been forced to make camp by the roadside, gathering what little firewood she could find before the children's strength gave out. 10-year-old Mary, the oldest, looked at her mother with eyes too wise for her age. "The baby's hungry again, Mama." Delilah nodded, fighting back tears. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, saving every morsel for the children, and her milk was dwindling. The baby's cries grew more insistent as the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. A storm was coming, and they had nowhere to shelter. "Let's sing a song," she suggested, trying to distract the older children while she nursed the infant. "Remember the one Papa used to sing?" As the children's hesitant voices rose in the darkness, Delilah closed her eyes and prayed harder than she ever had. They wouldn't survive another night like this. She needed a miracle. Miles away, Caleb Harrington sat in his cabin, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. At 32, he had spent the last decade building his ranch from nothing into one of the most prosperous spreads in the territory. 2,000 acres, 300 head of cattle, and not a soul to share it with except for his ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse a quarter-mile away. The loneliness never bothered him much during the day when work consumed his every waking moment. But nights like these, with the wind moaning through the eaves like a lost soul, the emptiness of the big house seemed to mock him. His parents had built this place for a family, with 4 bedrooms and a large kitchen table meant for Sunday dinners and celebration. Now it housed just one man and his regrets. Taking another sip of whiskey, Caleb walked to the window and stared out at the approaching storm clouds. Something made him uneasy tonight, a feeling he couldn't shake. Instinct, perhaps. The same instinct that had kept him alive during the war and helped him survive those first brutal winters alone on the frontier. "Storms coming in faster than expected," he muttered to himself, setting down his glass and reaching for his hat and coat. He needed to check on the new calves in the north pasture. If the weather turned as bad as it threatened, they'd need to be moved to the sheltered pen near the barn. As he saddled his horse, a large chestnut gelding named Samson, lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the ranch yard in stark relief. Thunder followed immediately, a deafening boom that made even steady Samson flinch. Caleb patted the horse's neck reassuringly. "Easy, boy. Just a quick ride and we'll both be back by the fire." He rode swiftly, checking the herd and instructing 2 of his hands to move the vulnerable calves. Satisfied that the ranch was secured against the coming storm, he turned Samson toward home, taking the longer route that followed the main road. Something still nagged at him, that persistent feeling that something wasn't right. The first drops of rain began to fall as he crested the hill overlooking the east road. Lightning flashed again, and in that brief illumination, he saw something that made him pull Samson to a sudden halt. Down by the roadside, barely visible through the gathering darkness, stood the broken remains of a wagon, and huddled beside it, the unmistakable shapes of human figures. "What in God's name?" he murmured, spurring Samson forward. As he drew closer, the wind carried a sound more haunting than any storm, the thin, reedy cry of an infant. Delilah had given up trying to keep the fire lit. The wind had grown too strong, and the first heavy drops of rain had quickly doused their pitiful flame. Now, she and the children huddled beneath the broken wagon, using its tilted bed as meager shelter against the elements. She had placed the younger children in the center, with herself and the older ones forming a protective circle around them. The baby wailed inconsolably, her tiny face red with effort. "Mama, I'm scared," whispered 5-year-old Rebecca, clutching at Delilah's skirt. "There's nothing to be afraid of," Delilah lied again, pulling the child closer. "The storm will pass, and tomorrow we'll—" The sudden sound of hoofbeats cut through the wind, and Delilah tensed. Travelers on this road could mean salvation or danger. A woman alone with children made an easy target for those with ill intent. "Mary, take the baby," she whispered urgently, passing the infant to her eldest daughter. "Children, stay quiet and still." Rising to her feet, Delilah positioned herself between her children and the approaching rider. She fumbled in her pocket for the small knife her husband had insisted she carry. It would do little good against a determined attacker, but she would die before letting any harm come to her children. The rider appeared through the gloom, a tall silhouette atop a massive horse. As he drew nearer, lightning illuminated his features, a man in his early 30s, with a strong jawline shadowed by several days' growth of beard. He wore a cattleman's clothes, well worn but of good quality, and his expression, as far as she could discern through the darkness, seemed more concerned than threatening. "Madam," he called out, his voice deep but gentle, "are you folks all right out here?" Delilah hesitated, her hand still gripping the knife in her pocket. "Our wagon broke down," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "We're just waiting out the storm." The man dismounted, moving slowly as if conscious of her fear. "This is no night to be out in the open, especially with little ones." He glanced at the huddled shapes beneath the wagon. "How many children you got there?" "9, she answered, chin lifting slightly. "My husband." Her voice faltered, but she forced herself to continue. "My husband passed recently. We're traveling to Oregon to my sister." The man's expression softened visibly. 9 children, he repeated quietly, shaking his head, and a storm about to break wide open. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. "Name's Caleb Harrington, madam. I own the Triple H Ranch about 2 miles back up the road. I'd like to offer you and your children shelter for the night." Another flash of lightning, another crash of thunder, and the rain began to fall in earnest. The baby's cries grew more frantic. "I don't accept charity, Mr. Harrington," Delilah said stiffly, even as the rain soaked through her threadbare coat. Caleb replaced his hat, water already streaming from its brim. "It's not charity to help a neighbor, madam, and out here, anyone on your land is a neighbor." He glanced at the broken wagon. "That axle's split clean through. It won't be moving tonight, maybe not for several days. Your little ones will take sick in this weather." As if to emphasize his point, Joseph began to cough, a deep, rattling sound that terrified Delilah. Her resistance crumbled. "Very well, Mr. Harrington. We accept your hospitality for tonight." Caleb nodded, relief evident in his posture. "My horse can carry the smallest ones. The rest of us will have to walk, but it's not far." Working quickly, they arranged the 3 youngest children securely on Samson's broad back. Caleb carried the baby, tucking the infant inside his coat to protect her from the rain. With Mary holding the horse's reins and Delilah herding the other children, they set off through the storm toward the promise of shelter. The rain fell in blinding sheets by the time the lights of the ranch house came into view. Delilah could barely put one foot in front of the other, exhaustion and hunger making her steps uncertain. Twice she stumbled, and each time Caleb was there, steadying her with a strong hand while still cradling her infant daughter. "Almost there," he encouraged, his voice barely audible above the storm. The ranch house was larger than Delilah had expected, a sprawling 2-story structure built of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around its front. Light glowed from several windows, and as they approached, the front door opened to reveal a small, gray-haired woman with kind eyes. "Land's sake, Caleb, what on earth?" the woman exclaimed, ushering them quickly inside. "Mrs. Hodgson, we have guests," Caleb announced unnecessarily. "This is Mrs." He paused, realizing he hadn't asked her name. "Faulkner," Delilah supplied wearily. "Delilah Faulkner. These are my children." Mrs. Hodgson, who Delilah would later learn was Caleb's housekeeper, moved with remarkable efficiency, clucking and fussing over the soaked children like a mother hen. "Poor lambs, soaked to the bone. And a baby too. Mr. Harrington, stoke up that fire while I find some dry clothes. There are still some things in the attic from when your sisters visited last summer." Within 30 minutes, the Faulkner children had been dried, clothed in borrowed garments, and seated around the largest kitchen table Delilah had ever seen. Mrs. Hodgson produced a pot of hearty stew that had been simmering for Caleb's dinner, adding more vegetables and broth to stretch it for the unexpected guests. Fresh bread appeared, along with butter and honey, and Delilah watched in grateful amazement as her children ate their first proper meal in weeks. "You must eat too, Mrs. Faulkner," Caleb insisted, placing a bowl before her. "The little one needs her mother strong." Delilah couldn't argue with that logic. As she ate, savoring each spoonful of the rich stew, she studied their host surreptitiously. In the lamplight of his home, Caleb Harrington cut an impressive figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with features that spoke of both strength and kindness. His eyes, she noted, were a clear gray blue, like the sky after a storm has passed. "Your home is beautiful, Mr. Harrington," she said politely, once the desperate edge of her hunger had been satisfied. "Thank you. It was my parents' dream. They came out here when this was still wilderness. Built it room by room over the years." A shadow passed across his face. "They've been gone 5 years now. Yellow fever took them both within a week of each other." "I'm sorry," Delilah said softly. "It's hard to lose those we love." Caleb nodded, his eyes meeting hers briefly in shared understanding of grief. "Mrs. Hodgson will show you and the girls to the upstairs bedrooms. The boys can sleep in the bunkroom off the kitchen. It's where my hands stay when weather keeps them from reaching the bunkhouse." "Mr. Harrington, your generosity is overwhelming, but I must insist we'll be on our way as soon as the storm passes." Caleb's expression grew serious. "Mrs. Faulkner, your wagon needs significant repairs. The wheel is broken, but the axle is the real problem. My foreman, Jenkins, is handy with such things, but it will take several days, maybe a week." Delilah felt the blood drain from her face. A week. They had no money for repairs, no resources to pay for an extended stay. "I can't impose," she began, but Caleb cut her off gently. "You're not imposing. This house has stood half empty for too long. As for the repairs, consider it neighborly assistance. Out here we help each other. It's how we survive." Delilah wanted to protest further, but exhaustion overwhelmed her. The baby began to fuss in her arms, and 10-year-old Mary was already nodding off at the table, her head drooping toward her empty bowl. "Thank you," she said finally, the words inadequate for the depth of her gratitude. "We'll find a way to repay your kindness." Caleb shook his head, a small smile touching his lips. "Get some rest, Mrs. Faulkner. Things will look brighter in the morning," as Delilah followed Mrs. Hodgson upstairs, the infant now sleeping peacefully against her shoulder. She couldn't help but wonder about the solitary rancher who had brought them out of the storm. There was a sadness about him that matched her own, a loneliness that seemed at odds with his generous nature. Why did such a man live alone in this big, beautiful house? The upstairs bedroom was the finest Delilah had ever seen, with a large feather bed, polished furniture, and curtains that Mrs. Hodgson apologized for being a bit faded from the sun. To Delilah, who had been sleeping on the ground or in the wagon for weeks, it seemed like a palace. "The connecting room has 2 beds for your older girls," Mrs. Hodgson explained, turning down the covers. "And there's a cradle in the corner for the wee one." Mr. Harrington's mother kept it, hoping for grandchildren someday. A sadness touched her voice. Poor Mrs. Harrington never got to see them. "Does Mr. Harrington have no family of his own?" Delilah asked, curiosity getting the better of her. Mrs. Hodgson busied herself with laying out fresh towels. "No, though not for lack of opportunity. Half the unmarried women in the territory have set their caps for him, but he keeps to himself. After his experience during the war and then losing his parents, I think he's afraid to let anyone too close." She seemed to realize she'd said more than intended and quickly changed the subject. "There's fresh water in the pitcher if you want to wash, and I've left a nightgown on the chair. Will you need anything else, Mrs. Faulkner?" "No, thank you. You've been more than kind." After Mrs. Hodgson departed, Delilah settled the baby in the cradle, marveling at how perfectly it suited her tiny daughter. She washed her face and hands, changed into the borrowed nightgown, and slipped between the clean sheets of the bed. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but for the first time in months, Delilah felt safe. As sleep claimed her, her last thought was of gray-blue eyes and the gentle hands that had carried her baby through the storm. Morning brought clarity, and an array of challenges Delilah hadn't been able to consider in the midst of the previous night's crisis. Sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air and the face of her infant daughter, who gurgled happily in the cradle beside the bed. The storm had passed, leaving behind a washed-clean world and the reality of her precarious situation. They were dependent on the charity of a stranger, a kind stranger, certainly, but a man nonetheless. A woman alone with 9 children had to be careful about appearances, about obligations that might be implied or expected. Delilah had encountered enough men in her journey west to know that not all assistance came without strings attached. Yet something about Caleb Harrington inspired trust. The way he had helped them without hesitation, the respect in his manner when addressing her, the gentle way he had carried baby Emma through the storm, these were not the actions of a man with dishonorable intentions. A light knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Mrs. Faulkner, are you awake?" It was Mrs. Hodgson. "Yes, come in," Delilah called, sitting up in bed and quickly smoothing her hair. The housekeeper entered with a tray bearing a pot of coffee, a cup, and a small plate of biscuits. "Good morning. I thought you might appreciate a quiet moment before joining the household. Your older children are already up and helping with chores. Remarkable youngsters they are, insisted on making themselves useful." Delilah felt a swell of pride. They know the value of work. Their father taught them well. She accepted the coffee gratefully, its rich aroma making her realize how long it had been since she'd enjoyed such a luxury. "How is Mr. Harrington this morning?" "Already been out since dawn, checking on the herd after the storm. He's had your wagon brought to the barn. Jenkins is looking it over now." Mrs. Hodgson busied herself straightening the room. "Mr. Harrington thought you might like to rest today, but said to tell you that you're welcome to make use of anything in the house. There's a tub in the washroom down the hall if you'd like a proper bath." A proper bath. Delilah couldn't remember the last time she'd had more than a quick wash in a stream or with a rag and basin. "That sounds wonderful, but I shouldn't impose further nonsense," Mrs. Hodgson interrupted firmly. Mr. Harrington was quite clear. "You and your children are to be treated as honored guests for as long as you need to stay." She paused, her expression softening. "I don't mean to pry, Mrs. Faulkner, but might I ask how long you've been on the road? The little ones seem quite thin, and that baby can't be more than a month old." Delilah sighed, seeing no reason to hide their circumstances. "Emma is 3 weeks old. My husband Thomas took ill just before her birth, pneumonia. He lingered just long enough to see her, then passed. The pain was still raw, a wound that hadn't begun to heal. The bank took our farm in Kansas. I had nothing left but the wagon and what little we could pack. My sister in Oregon wrote that I could join her family there." Mrs. Hodgson clucked sympathetically. "Such a journey with 9 little ones and grief still fresh. You're a brave woman, Mrs. Faulkner." "Not brave," Delilah corrected softly, looking down at her sleeping infant. "Desperate." After enjoying her coffee and biscuits, Delilah dressed in her own clothes, freshly washed and dried overnight by Mrs. Hodgson's efficient hands. The bath was everything she had dreamed of. Hot water and real soap, easing the aches of weeks of hard travel. By the time she emerged, pink-cheeked and feeling human again, her younger children had returned from their explorations of the ranch, full of excitement about the horses, cattle, and the friendly ranch hands who had shown them the newborn calves. "And Mr. Harrington said I could help with the horses if it's all right with you, Mama," 8-year-old William reported eagerly. "He says I have a natural way with them." "Did he now?" Delilah smiled, touched by the rancher's kindness toward her children. "Well, we'll see. We won't be staying long, remember, just until the wagon is fixed." "About that," came a deep voice from the doorway. Caleb Harrington stood there, his tall frame filling the space. He removed his hat as he entered, revealing hair still damp from washing. "Mrs. Faulkner, if you have a moment, I'd like to discuss your wagon." Sending the children to help Mrs. Hodgson shell peas for lunch, Delilah followed Caleb to his study, a comfortable room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large desk covered in papers. "Please sit down," he invited, gesturing to a leather chair across from his own. "Jenkins examined your wagon this morning. I'm afraid the news isn't good." Delilah's heart sank. "How bad is it?" "The axle is completely split, and the wheel itself is beyond repair. The undercarriage has significant damage as well, likely from overloading and rough roads." He hesitated, clearly choosing his words carefully. "Jenkins believes it would be more practical to build you a new wagon than to repair the old one. Either way, it's going to take at least 2 weeks, possibly 3. 3 weeks." Delilah felt dizzy at the prospect. "Mr. Harrington, I can't possibly impose on your hospitality for so long." "It's no imposition," he assured her quickly. "In fact, I've been thinking about your situation, Mrs. Faulkner. You're undertaking a dangerous journey with 9 young children, limited supplies, and from what I observed last night, very little in the way of funds." His direct assessment was delivered without judgment, merely stating facts. "Oregon is still more than 1,000 miles away, over some of the most difficult terrain in the country. Winter will be setting in by the time you reach the mountains, even if you could travel at a good pace." Delilah swallowed hard, fighting back tears of frustration. Everything he said was true, but what choice did she have? We have nowhere else to go. My sister is our only hope. Caleb leaned forward, his expression earnest. I'd like to make a proposition, Mrs. Faulkner. Stay here at Triple H until spring. The children will be safe fed and can even attend the small school that serves the ranching families in the area. By spring, we'll have your wagon ready, a proper one, built for the journey and supplies enough to see you safely to Oregon. Delilah stared at him, stunned by the offer. Mr. Harrington, why would you do this for complete strangers? A shadow passed over his face. During the war, I was injured at Antietam. A farm family took me in, nursed me back to health at great risk to themselves. They didn't know me, had no reason to help a half-dead soldier who might have been fighting for either side for all they knew. His eyes met hers, filled with an intensity that made her breath catch. I swore then that if I survived, I would pass on that kindness whenever I could. It's too much, Delilah protested weakly. We would be a burden on your household for months. Hardly a burden. This house was built for a family. He gestured to the space around them. It stood half empty for too long, and to be perfectly honest, Mrs. Faulkner, your children have brought more life to this place in one day than it's seen in years. A smile softened his features. Mrs. Hodgson is already smitten with them, especially little Emma. I think she's missed having children to fuss over. Delilah hesitated, torn between pride and practicality. I would need to contribute somehow. I can't accept charity for months on end. Caleb nodded, as if he'd anticipated this objection. Mrs. Hodgson isn't getting any younger. She could use help managing the household, especially with so many extra mouths to feed. Your older children can assist with appropriate chores, as many have already volunteered to do. I'll pay fair wages for the work, which you can save toward your journey. It was a generous offer, one that would solve their immediate problems while preserving Delilah's dignity. Still, she hesitated. Mr. Harrington, I appreciate your kindness more than I can express, but I must consider how this arrangement might appear to others. A widow and her children living under the roof of an unmarried man. Understanding dawned in his eyes. You're concerned about propriety. I have my children's reputations to consider as well as my own. Caleb nodded thoughtfully. Your concern is valid, Mrs. Faulkner. Though I assure you, the neighbors around here are far too scattered to engage in much gossip. He considered for a moment. What if you and your daughters took the east wing of the house? It has its own entrance and staircase, originally built as a separate apartment for my grandparents. Your boys could stay in the rooms above the kitchen, where the hands sometimes sleep. We would essentially be two separate households under one roof. It was a reasonable compromise, and Delilah found herself running out of objections. The reality was that she had few options, and none of them as promising as what Caleb offered. Her children needed stability, safety, and regular meals, all things the Triple H Ranch could provide. Very well, Mr. Harrington, she said finally. We accept your generous offer until spring. The relief on his face was palpable. Excellent. I'll have Jenkins begin work on your new wagon immediately, and we'll prepare the east wing for you and your daughters. He stood, extending his hand across the desk. Welcome to Triple H, Mrs. Faulkner. As Delilah placed her hand in his, she was struck by the warmth of his grip, the calluses that spoke of hard work, and the gentleness with which he held her fingers. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt something other than grief and fear, a small spark of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, things might turn out all right after all. The days at Triple H Ranch quickly fell into a comfortable routine. True to his word, Caleb had the east wing prepared for Delilah and her daughters, while her sons settled into the rooms above the kitchen. Mrs. Hodgson, delighted to have a household to manage again, took to her expanded duties with enthusiasm, teaching Delilah the rhythms and requirements of the ranch. Delilah found unexpected joy in domestic tasks that had once been burdens. With proper tools and ingredients, cooking became a pleasure rather than a desperate scramble to make meager supplies stretch. The large kitchen, with its cast iron stove and ample pantry, allowed her to prepare meals that filled her children's hollow cheeks and brought color back to their pale faces. The children thrived in the stability of ranch life. Mary and 9-year-old Elizabeth helped with household tasks, while William and Joseph, aged 8 and 7, eagerly apprenticed themselves to the ranch hands, learning to care for animals and mend fences. Even the younger ones found their places: 5-year-old Rebecca and 4-year-old twins Sarah and Samuel following Mrs. Hodgson like devoted ducklings, while 3-year-old David toddled after Caleb whenever the rancher was in sight. Baby Emma, growing stronger by the day, became the darling of the entire ranch, passed from admiring arms to admiring arms. As for Caleb, Delilah observed him with growing curiosity. He was a man of contradictions, a hard-working rancher with the education and manners of a gentleman, a solitary figure who nonetheless commanded the respect and loyalty of his men, a person clearly comfortable with solitude, who seemed to genuinely enjoy the chaos that 9 children brought to his ordered world. He took special interest in teaching the boys riding and roping, his patience seemingly endless as he showed them how to sit a horse properly or throw a lariat. On Sundays, he read to the younger children from books filled with adventure stories and fairy tales, his deep voice bringing the characters to life. And though he maintained a respectful distance from Delilah herself, she often caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. One crisp October evening, after the children had been tucked into bed, Delilah found herself alone on the wide porch that wrapped around the main house. The night was clear, stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamonds on black cloth. She breathed deeply, savoring the scent of pine and the distant smell of wood smoke. "Beautiful night," came Caleb's voice from the shadows. Delilah started slightly, then smiled as he stepped into the pool of light spilling from the window. "It is. I've always loved autumn stars. They seem brighter somehow. My father used to say that's because the air is clearer, without summer's haze." Caleb joined her at the railing, maintaining a proper distance between them. "Are you and the children settling in all right?" "More than all right. You've given us a safe harbor, Mr. Harrington. I can never adequately express my gratitude." "Caleb," he said quietly, "after a month of sharing meals and a roof, I think you might call me Caleb." Delilah hesitated, then nodded. "Caleb then, and I'm Delilah." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant howl of a coyote and the soft nickering of horses in the stable. "Your boys have a natural way with animals," Caleb observed. "William especially. He's got a gift for horses. They trust him instinctively." Pride warmed Delilah's voice. His father was the same way. Thomas could gentle the wildest colt just by talking to it. "You must miss him very much." "Every day," she admitted softly. "We had 12 years together. Not enough, but more than some are granted." She glanced at Caleb's profile, illuminated by the moonlight. "Mrs. Hodgson mentioned you fought in the war. Were you very young?" 18 when I enlisted. 22 when I came home." His voice held no inflection, but Delilah sensed the weight of unspoken memories behind the simple statement. "I was lucky. Many didn't return at all." "And you came west after," Caleb nodded. "My parents had purchased this land before the war but hadn't developed it much. I convinced them to let me try my hand at ranching, Turns out I had a knack for it. A hint of pride colored his words. Started with 50 head of cattle in this house. Now we run 300 head across 2,000 acres. An impressive achievement, Delilah said sincerely. It kept me busy, gave me purpose when I needed it most. He turned slightly, his gray-blue eyes reflecting the starlight. What will you do in Oregon, Delilah? Your sister has room for all of you. The question hit a nerve Delilah had been trying to ignore. My sister's husband has a logging business. They've offered us a place to stay until I can get established, perhaps find work as a seamstress or cook. And your children? Will there be schooling available? I'm not certain, she admitted. My sister's last letter was vague on details. I suppose I've been focused more on getting there than on what happens after. Caleb's expression grew thoughtful. There's a good school here, as you've seen. The teacher, Miss Clark, speaks highly of your older children's progress. They've always been quick learners. Thomas insisted on education, even when work on the farm demanded their help. A wise man, Caleb commented. Education gives options that hard work alone cannot provide. Another silence fell, this one charged with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Caleb straightened from the railing. It's getting cold. You should go inside before you catch a chill. Yes, I suppose I should. Delilah hesitated, then added impulsively, Thank you for the conversation, Caleb. It's been a long time since I've spoken to someone as an adult rather than as a mother. A smile touched his lips, transforming his serious face. The pleasure was mine, Delilah. Good night. As October gave way to November, the ranch prepared for winter. Hay was stacked in towering mounds, cattle were moved to sheltered pastures, and the house was made ready for the cold months ahead. Windows were checked for drafts, firewood was stacked in neat piles beside every hearth, and preserves were counted and organized in the root cellar. Delilah threw herself into these preparations with energy born of purpose and gratitude. She and Mrs. Hodgson worked side by side, teaching the older girls how to preserve the last of the garden's bounty and prepare the household linens for winter. In the evenings, she mended clothing by lamplight, sometimes joined by Caleb, who would read aloud from one of his many books while she worked. These quiet evenings became a cherished ritual. After the children were asleep, they would sit in the comfortable parlor, Delilah with her mending basket and Caleb with a book. Sometimes they discussed what he read, history, philosophy, or poetry, and Delilah found herself engaging in intellectual conversations she had thought lost to her with Thomas's death. Other times, they simply shared the silence, comfortable in each other's presence without the need for words. It was during these moments that Delilah began to recognize the slow shift in her feelings toward the rancher from gratitude to friendship, and gradually, to something that made her heart beat faster when he entered a room. The first snow came in late November, transforming the ranch into a wonderland of white that delighted the children. Caleb showed the boys how to build snow forts and carve simple sleds from barrel staves, while Mrs. Hodgson taught the girls to make snow cream sweetened with maple syrup. Even Delilah found herself laughing as she hadn't in years, her face flushed with cold and happiness as she joined in a snowball fight that pitted the children against Caleb and his ranch hands. That evening, as they all gathered around the huge dining table for supper, Delilah looked at the faces of her children, rosy-cheeked, well-fed, and secure, and felt a pang of bittersweet joy. They had found happiness here, a sense of belonging that had been missing since long before Thomas's death, when financial struggles had cast a shadow over their family life. The thought of uprooting them again in spring, of facing the uncertainty and hardship of the trail to Oregon, filled her with dread. "Penny for your thoughts?" Caleb asked quietly, noticing her distraction as they cleared the dinner dishes while the children helped Mrs. Hodgson prepare dessert. "I was just thinking how different this winter will be from what we expected," Delilah replied, keeping her voice low. "A month ago, I wasn't sure we'd survive until spring, let alone enjoy comforts like this." Caleb's expression softened. "Children are resilient. So are their mothers, it seems." Something in his tone made Delilah look up, meeting his gaze directly. The warmth she saw there made her breath catch. Before she could respond, Mrs. Hodgson bustled in with the children and a large apple pie, breaking the moment. The following week brought the first real blizzard of the season, a howling tempest that confined everyone to the house for 3 days. Caleb and his ranch hands ventured out only to tend to essential chores, returning covered in snow and ice, their faces red with cold. The children, confined indoors, grew restless until Caleb suggested they put on a play for the adults. What followed was a chaotic but heartwarming production of Cinderella, with Mary in the title role, William as the prince, and the younger children cast as various mice, stepsisters, and fairy godmothers. Delilah helped fashion costumes from sheets and curtains, while Caleb constructed a makeshift stage in the parlor. Mrs. Hodgson provided an enthusiastic audience, along with several ranch hands who had been invited to share dinner with the family to celebrate the end of the storm. As Delilah watched her children perform with such joy and confidence, she felt a hand slip into hers. Glancing sideways, she saw Caleb watching the play, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He didn't look at her or acknowledge the gesture in any way, but his fingers remained entwined with hers until the final bow, when he joined in the thunderous applause that filled the parlor. That night, after the excitement had died down and the house grew quiet, Delilah found herself unable to sleep. The touch of Caleb's hand lingered in her memory, along with the increasing awareness that her feelings for him had grown far beyond friendship or gratitude. It troubled her, not because the feelings themselves were unwelcome, but because they complicated an already complex situation. She was a widow with 9 children, dependent on his charity, planning to leave in the spring. He was a successful rancher, unmarried by choice according to Mrs. Hodgson, with no indication that he wanted the burden of an instant family. The sensible course would be to guard her heart, to maintain the proper distance between benefactor and recipient. Yet as December arrived, bringing with it preparations for Christmas, Delilah found it increasingly difficult to maintain that distance. Caleb seemed to seek her company more frequently, finding reasons to join her on errands to town or lingering after dinner for conversation. His interactions with the children grew more paternal, teaching the boys to whittle, helping the girls construct a dollhouse from scraps of wood, spending hours with baby Emma on his lap while he reviewed the ranch accounts. The situation came to a head one evening in mid-December, when Caleb invited Delilah to accompany him to town for supplies and to select Christmas gifts for the children. Mrs. Hodgson agreed to watch the little ones, and they set out in Caleb's sleigh, wrapped in buffalo robes against the cold. The small town of Pine Creek, some 5 miles from the ranch, was festively decorated for the holiday season. Garlands of pine boughs adorned the storefronts, and candles glowed in windows against the early winter darkness. Caleb helped Delilah from the sleigh with careful hands, then offered his arm as they made their way along the snowy boardwalk. "I thought we might stop at Whitaker's General Store first," he suggested. "They have the best selection of toys and books for the children." Delilah nodded, suddenly conscious of how they must appear to others like any married couple doing their Christmas shopping. The thought brought both pleasure and unease. At Whitaker's, Caleb insisted on purchasing gifts for each of her children: carved wooden animals for the boys, porcelain dolls for the girls, and a silver rattle for baby Emma. When Delilah protested the expense, he shook his head firmly. "Consider it my Christmas gift to them," he said. "They've brought more joy to Triple H than I could have imagined. Besides," he added with a smile, "what's the point of success if you can't share it with others?" Their next stop was the milliner's shop, where Caleb stunned Delilah by suggesting she select a new bonnet for herself. "The blue one would complement your eyes," he said softly, watching as she tried it on hesitantly. "Caleb, this is too much," she protested, though her fingers lingered on the fine ribbon trim. "Delilah," he said, his voice serious despite the public setting, "you've worked harder than any of my hands these past months. You deserve something beautiful for yourself." Unable to argue with the sincerity in his eyes, she allowed him to purchase the bonnet, along with warm gloves for each of her children. Their final errand took them to the small hotel that served as Pine Creek's social center. Caleb had been invited to the town's Christmas celebration and had asked Delilah and the children to accompany him. They needed to confirm arrangements with the hotel's proprietor, Mrs. Sullivan. As they entered the warm lobby, they were greeted by several townspeople who clearly held Caleb in high regard. Delilah noticed the curious glances directed her way and the speculative looks that passed between some of the women present. "Mr. Harrington," called a well-dressed woman of about 40, approaching them with a practiced smile. "What a pleasure to see you in town, and this must be your guest, Mrs. Bennet," Caleb acknowledged with a polite nod. "May I present Mrs. Delilah Faulkner? She and her children are staying at Triple H while their wagon is being repaired for the journey to Oregon. How fortunate for them that they found such a generous benefactor," Mrs. Bennet remarked, her smile not quite reaching her eyes as she assessed Delilah from bonnet to boots. "We've heard so much about your arrangement." Delilah felt heat rise to her cheeks at the woman's insinuating tone. Before she could respond, Caleb placed a protective hand at the small of her back. "Mrs. Faulkner is a widow traveling with 9 children, Mrs. Bennet. Her courage in undertaking such a journey commands my utmost respect." His tone was pleasant, but carried an unmistakable warning. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have business with Mrs. Sullivan." As they moved away, Delilah whispered, "I should have anticipated this. A single man and a widow under one roof. People will talk." "Let them," Caleb replied quietly. "Those who matter know the truth." Their business with Mrs. Sullivan concluded quickly, and they started back toward the sleigh. As they walked, snow began to fall again, large flakes drifting down in the golden light of the street lamps. Caleb paused beneath the shelter of an awning, turning to face Delilah. "I apologize for Mrs. Bennet's implications," he said. "She's the self-appointed guardian of Pine Creek's morality, though her own is questionable at best." Delilah smiled despite her discomfort. "It's not your fault, and she's not entirely wrong to question. Our situation is unusual." "It doesn't have to be," Caleb said suddenly, his expression intent. "Delilah, there's something I've wanted to discuss with you, but I've been waiting for the right moment." Her heart began to race. "Yes, he began, but was interrupted by a shout from across the street. "Harrington." "Just the man I wanted to see." A portly gentleman in an expensive coat waved enthusiastically, hurrying toward them through the snow. Caleb's jaw tightened momentarily, but he composed his features into a welcoming expression as the man approached. "Judge Parker, good evening." The interruption extended into an invitation to dinner, which Caleb politely declined, explaining they needed to return to the ranch before the snow worsened. By the time they extracted themselves from the conversation, the moment had passed, and whatever Caleb had been about to say remained unspoken. The ride back to Triple H was quieter than their journey into town. Delilah found herself stealing glances at Caleb's profile as he handled the reins, wondering what he had intended to tell her. His expression was thoughtful, almost troubled, and several times he seemed on the verge of speaking, only to fall silent again. As they approached the ranch, the house came into view, windows glowing with welcoming light against the snowy darkness. Delilah felt a surge of emotion at the sight, not just gratitude, but a deeper sense of belonging. In the months since that stormy night when Caleb had found them beside the road, Triple H had become more than a temporary shelter. It had become home. Caleb drew the sleigh to a halt before the main house, setting the brake before turning to Delilah. Snowflakes clung to his hat and coat, and his breath formed small clouds in the cold air. "Delilah," he said quietly, "what I was trying to say in town, I've been thinking about your plans for the spring." "Yes," she prompted when he paused. "I wonder if you've considered alternatives to Oregon," he continued, his voice careful. "The journey would still be difficult, and from what you've said, your sister's situation isn't entirely secure." Delilah nodded slowly. "I've had similar thoughts. The children are thriving here. To uproot them again, to face the uncertainties of the trail and what waits at the end of it." She sighed. "But what choice do we have?" Caleb took a deep breath, as if gathering his courage. "You could stay at Triple H." "Caleb, your generosity has been extraordinary, but we can't impose indefinitely, not as guests," he interrupted, taking her gloved hands in his. "As family." Delilah's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this house was built for a family. My parents' dream was to fill it with children and laughter, to create a legacy that would outlast them." His eyes held hers, earnest and vulnerable. "These past months, watching you with your children, seeing how they've brought life back to this place, I've realized that I want that too. I want a family, Delilah. I want you and your children to stay, not as guests, but as my wife and family." Stunned silence followed his declaration. Delilah's mind raced, emotions colliding: hope, fear, disbelief. "Caleb, the children." "It's 9 children," she stammered, unable to form a coherent response. A smile touched his lips. "I'm well aware of the count. I've fed them, bandaged their scrapes, and listened to their prayers for 3 months now." His expression grew serious again. "I know this is sudden, and I don't expect an immediate answer. I know, too, that your heart may not be ready. Thomas hasn't been gone a year, and grief has its own timeline." "It's not that," Delilah said softly. "Thomas would want us to be happy, to be safe. He loved his children more than anything." She searched Caleb's face, looking for any sign of doubt or reservation. "But marriage is a serious commitment, Caleb. 9 children is an enormous responsibility. Are you certain this is what you want?" "I've never been more certain of anything," he replied without hesitation. "I love them already, Delilah. And I love you, your strength, your grace, your unending capacity for care despite all you've endured. I didn't expect to find love again after the war took so much from me. But you and your children have given me back a part of myself I thought was lost forever." Tears welled in Delilah's eyes, spilling over to freeze on her cheeks in the cold air. "We have nothing to bring to this marriage except ourselves." "No dowry, no property, you bring everything that matters," Caleb interrupted gently, wiping away her tears with a gloved thumb. "A family, love, purpose," he smiled. "And considerable skill with managing a household, which Mrs. Hodgson appreciates more than she'll admit." A laugh escaped Delilah, watery but genuine. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple at its heart. We care for each other, we want the same things. The rest is just details." He squeezed her hands. "Think about it, Delilah. Talk to the children if you wish." I'll abide by whatever decision you make." Before she could respond, the front door burst open, and a chorus of excited voices called out as the children spilled onto the porch, eager to see what presents had been purchased in town. The moment of intimacy was broken, but the question Caleb had posed hung in the air between them, full of possibility. Christmas arrived in a flurry of excitement and preparation. The children, caught up in the magic of their first holiday at Triple H, seemed oblivious to the undercurrents of tension and anticipation that flowed between Delilah and Caleb. If they noticed the lingering glances or the careful way the adults maintained physical distance while remaining hyper-aware of each other's presence, they gave no sign. Delilah had not yet given Caleb her answer. The proposal, unexpected and overwhelming, required careful consideration not just for herself, but for her children. Marriage to Caleb would mean abandoning their plans for Oregon, settling permanently in Montana, and asking her children to accept a new father less than a year after losing their own. Yet when she tentatively broached the subject with Mary, her eldest and most perceptive child, the girl's response surprised her. "Mr. Harrington asked you to marry him," Mary had exclaimed, eyes wide. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. "I hoped he would, Mama. He looks at you the way Papa used to." "You wouldn't mind. It hasn't been very long since your father, Papa, wouldn't want us to be sad forever," Mary said with the simple wisdom of childhood. "And he definitely wouldn't want us to go all the way to Oregon if we could stay somewhere safe, with someone who cares about us." She hesitated, then added softly, "Mr. Harrington is good to us, Mama. He listens when we talk. He remembers what we like and don't like, and he makes you smile again." Similar conversations with William and Elizabeth yielded equally supportive responses. The younger children, when asked if they would like to stay at Triple H forever, responded with enthusiasm, though Delilah suspected they didn't fully grasp the implications of Caleb becoming their stepfather. Still, she hesitated. Was she being fair to Caleb? 9 children was an enormous responsibility to take on, no matter how genuine his affection for them seemed. And what about her own feelings? She cared deeply for him, was attracted to him, respected and admired him, but was it love? Could she promise him the whole of her heart when part of it would always belong to Thomas? These questions occupied her thoughts as she helped prepare the house for Christmas. Pine boughs and holly decorated the mantels and stair railings, while candles glowed in every window. Mrs. Hodgson outdid herself in the kitchen, producing an array of cookies, cakes, and candies that delighted the children and added inches to everyone's waistlines. On Christmas Eve, the entire household gathered in the parlor where a magnificent pine tree stood decorated with paper chains made by the children, strings of cranberries and popcorn, and small carved ornaments that Caleb said had belonged to his mother. Presents were arranged beneath its branches, modest gifts that Delilah had managed to make or purchase for each of her children, along with the more lavish offerings from Caleb. After a traditional supper of roast goose and all the trimmings, they sang carols around the piano with Mrs. Hodgson playing and everyone joining in, even the ranch hands who had been invited to share in the celebration. As silent night filled the warm room, Delilah found her gaze drawn to Caleb, who stood across the circle with 3-year-old David on his shoulders and baby Emma cradled in one arm. The tableau struck her with such force that tears sprang to her eyes. This was what family looked like, what home felt like. In that moment, her decision crystallized with sudden clarity. Whatever uncertainties remained, whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew with certainty that she wanted this life, this family, this man. Later, when the children had finally been persuaded to go to bed with promises that morning would come sooner if they slept, Delilah found herself alone with Caleb in the parlor. The house had grown quiet, with only the crackle of the fire and the occasional creak of settling timbers breaking the silence. "They're finally asleep," she said softly, returning from checking on the youngest children, "though I suspect they'll be up at dawn." Caleb smiled, rising from his chair by the fire. "I remember being the same way as a boy. My parents always said Christmas morning made the roosters seem lazy by comparison." He crossed to the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape illuminated by a full moon. "It's a beautiful night. Clear and cold, perfect Christmas weather." Delilah joined him at the window, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Thank you for giving them such a wonderful Christmas. They've never had anything like this." "It's been my pleasure," he replied, his voice low. "Having the house full of children at Christmas. It's how it was meant to be." A moment of silence stretched between them, comfortable yet charged with unspoken words. Finally, Delilah gathered her courage. "Caleb, about your proposal." He turned to face her, his expression carefully neutral. "You don't need to answer now, Delilah. I meant what I said about giving you time." "I don't need more time," she said quietly. "I've thought about little else since that night. I've talked to the children, examined my heart, and considered our future from every angle." She took a deep breath. "My answer is yes, Caleb. I would be honored to be your wife, to make Triple H our home." The neutrality vanished from his face, replaced by such naked joy that it took her breath away. "Delilah," he whispered, reaching for her hands. "Are you certain?" "I don't want you to feel obligated because of our situation. This has nothing to do with obligation," she interrupted, squeezing his fingers. "It's about love, yours for us, ours for you, and what we can build together." She smiled through sudden tears. "The children adore you, and I love you, Caleb. Not in the same way I loved Thomas. That was a different time, a different life. But what I feel for you is real and true and deep." Caleb released her hands only to cup her face gently between his palms. "I never thought I'd find this again, a reason to look forward to each day, someone to share my life with, a family to call my own." His voice roughened with emotion. "I love you, Delilah Faulkner. I'll spend the rest of my days trying to be worthy of the gift you're giving me." "The gift is mutual," she whispered, her heart pounding as he leaned closer. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. When they parted, Caleb rested his forehead against hers, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Merry Christmas, Delilah." "Merry Christmas, Caleb." They were married on New Year's Day, 1886, in the parlor of Triple H Ranch. Judge Parker performed the ceremony, beaming with approval at the union of one of the territory's most eligible bachelors and the widow whose story had captivated the small community. Mrs. Hodgson cried openly, as did most of the ranch hands, though they tried to hide it behind handkerchiefs and discreet coughs. The children, resplendent in their best clothes, stood as witnesses, Mary and Elizabeth as Delilah's attendants, William proudly holding the rings on a small cushion, and the younger ones arranged by height in a semicircle of beaming faces. Even baby Emma cooperated, sleeping peacefully in Mrs. Hodgson's arms throughout the brief ceremony. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Parker declared with evident satisfaction. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Harrington." As Caleb's lips met hers, sealing their vows with a kiss both tender and promising, Delilah felt the last of her doubts dissolve. This was right. This was where they belonged. The celebrations continued well into the evening, with neighbors and townsfolk joining the ranch hands for a feast that Mrs. Hodgson declared the finest Triple H has ever seen. Music and dancing followed, with Caleb leading Delilah in the first dance while the children clapped and cheered. Later, after the guests had departed, and the children had been tucked into bed with stories of how they were now officially a family, Caleb led Delilah to the master bedroom, now their bedroom. He had redecorated it as a wedding gift, replacing the heavy masculine furnishings with a lighter, more welcoming aesthetic that blended his tastes with hers. "What do you think?" he asked, watching her face as she took in the new curtains, the quilted bedspread that matched the colors she favored, the small writing desk positioned near the window where morning light would fall. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning to face him. "Everything is perfect." As spring arrived, bringing new life to the ranch in the form of calves, foals, and wildflowers, Delilah reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. Standing on the porch of what was now truly her home, she watched Caleb teaching Joseph and William how to gentle a new colt, his patience and care evident in every movement. The wagon that had been built for their journey to Oregon stood unused in the barn, a reminder of plans abandoned for a better future. In its place, a new chapter had begun, one filled with the daily joys and challenges of ranch life, the love of a good man, and the security of knowing her children would grow up safe, loved, and part of a legacy built on kindness and second chances. That evening, as they prepared for bed, Delilah shared news she'd been keeping to herself until she was certain. "Caleb," she said softly, taking his hand and placing it gently against her still flat stomach, "it seems our family is going to grow again." His eyes widened, then filled with such tenderness that Delilah felt tears spring to her own. "A baby, you're sure?" she nodded, smiling through her tears. "Dr. Matthews confirmed it yesterday. In the autumn, there will be 11 children calling Triple H home." Caleb gathered her close, his arms strong and secure around her. 11 children, a beautiful wife, and more happiness than I ever dreamed possible," he murmured against her hair. "Who would have thought that a broken wagon and a stormy night could lead to such a blessing?" "Providence works in mysterious ways," Delilah replied, nestling against his chest. "That night when you found us beside the road and made room at your table, you weren't just offering shelter, you were offering a future." "Our future," Caleb corrected gently, tipping her face up to his. "And it's only just beginning." As his lips met hers in a kiss that spoke of promises kept and dreams yet to unfold, Delilah knew with absolute certainty that the road that had seemed so dark and hopeless had led exactly where they were meant to be, home, in each other's arms, surrounded by the family they had built together from broken pieces and brave hearts.